As always, the first exam tip, this article is about exam tips, but the first exam tip for this is always to read through the exercise first. Don't just come to the first question and do the first question. You have to read through the whole exercise first because it gives you an idea of context. First of all, context of what the article is all about. But secondly, context as regards who's involved, how they're involved, what the relationships are, and so on, so on. Because this is also an important part of understanding a text. It's not just a bunch of words on a piece of paper. There are relationships between words, there are relationships between people. And in this particular case, the relationship, if we can say that, is between the author and you. And that is important because you as a subject comes up as an answer a couple of times in this exam question. The second piece of exam advice that I'll give you is one to do with structure. Of course, you've got to make sure you know your basic elements of grammar. So you've got to know your tenses, you've got to know relative pronouns and relative clauses, you've got to know how they work. Conditional clauses, also good. If you had a wider knowledge of subclauses and main clauses, that would be fantastic. You're going to see things like substitution in these exams at FCE level and perhaps a little bit more at CAE level as well. And you're going to see you're going to have lots of knowledge about conjunctions, subordinate conjunctions, linkers, expressions, and so on, so on. So this exam question is a real challenge. And when I was teaching in language schools, this particular question, at FCE and CAE, was one of the most hated questions because it was one of the hardest questions, because it really tested your whole knowledge of English in terms of structure, in terms of grammar, in terms of your vocabulary as well. So this, if you manage to get, there's 8 questions in this question, and I always said if you manage to get 5 out of 8, that was a pretty good result. And anything you get over 5 out of 8 is a bonus. So of course we're aiming for 8 out of 8, but if you're looking for a target, then for this question, because it's one of the harder questions, if you give yourself the target of 5 out of 8, and you get that, you're doing quite well. Okay, so let's have a look at the exercise. And as I said, it's about exam tips. It's about preparing for an exam. And as I said, the relationship is between the author who is writing to you in terms of giving you advice about what to do. So if we go through the exercise, when the day comes, give yourself plenty of time, do everything. Just the example here, after plenty of time, we have to use the full infinitive. So we can't just say plenty of time, do everything. Do in this case would just be what we know as the bare infinitive or the naked infinitive, but we need the full infinitive after plenty of time. So the plenty of time to do everything. Have breakfast, but don't drink much. What's this sentence trying to say? The sentence trying to say is don't go crazy with drink. In other words, it's saying avoid drinking. There's no other way to explain this without giving you the answer. Avoid drinking too much. Avoid drinking too much. So we have to use the adverb here, too, which means an excessive amount or too much of something. And that's exactly what this is trying to say here. But so don't drink too much. Go to the toilet, arrive on time, etc., etc., etc. One quick note about vocabulary here. You'll see the language. It says yourself getting more and more nervous while you wait to start. This is a very common language mistake with Polish students because it's a false friend with zdenerwowane in Polish. Zdenerwowane means angry, irritated, whereas nervous in English generally means extremely worried, stressed, a little bit scared, not angry. So very often I hear the mistake, he's a very nervous person. And what they're trying to say is that he's a very angry person. we have to remember that nervous in English means this sense of worried, the sense of being scared, this feeling that you have if you don't know what's going to happen and something important is going to happen. So before an exam, before a bungee jump, before you get married, examples like that. But it doesn't mean angry or irritated, so we have to watch out for that. Now, I said a couple of times already that this is advice to you as the reader of this article, to give you advice, and this is important because if we have a look at the next question, it says in the exam, calm down by breathing deeply and thinking positively. So we've got a gap between calm down. The question is, who should calm down? What we need here is a subject. We need a subject to the sentence. But because of the structure of the sentence, we have to use a reflexive pronoun in this gap. So we can't say calm you down. This would be a mistake. So you would have to say calm yourself down. And hang on a second, let me just go through the answers. Let me just move this up here. I forgot about this pane. Here we go. So I can write the answers in here. So for gap number 1, it was 2. For gap number 2, it was calm yourself down. So we have to use the reflexive pronoun here. We could, of course, say this in a different way. We could say you must calm down, or you should calm down, or we can use a structure like that. But of course, given with the language that we've got, we have to think of the correct word, and in this case, it's the reflexive pronoun. So calm yourself down by breathing deeply and thinking positively. Read the exam questions carefully, good advice, and underline all of the key instruction words. Indicate how the questions should be answered. What do we need here? Read the exam questions carefully and underline all of the key instruction words. Indicate how the question should be answered. What we need here is a special kind of word which replaces key instruction words. Because if we said underline all of the key instruction words that indicate how the question should be answered, of course that would be too much of a mouthful. So what we need here is a relative pronoun, the correct relative pronoun to refer to key instruction words. And we've got two choices because of the structure of this relative clause. We could say underline all of the key instruction words that indicate, or we could say key instruction words which indicate how the questions should be answered. So for gap number 3, there are two possible answers here, that or which. If possible, wonderful. I love conditionals. Conditionals, very, very flexible, very, very useful language structures in English. If possible, start with the ones can do easily to give you confidence. Once again, the thing that's missing from this sentence is the person that we're talking about. And who are we talking about? Well, of course, the article is talking to you. So if possible, start with the ones you can do easily to give you confidence. So one good piece of advice when you're coming to this open-close exercise is to remember the basic active and passive language structures. So the active voice, subject, verb, object, and we've got the passive voice, which is object, verb, plus subject, or agent as it's called in the passive. So if you've got a sentence and we don't know who should be doing something or who is affected by what's happening, then there's a good chance that that might be the answer. And that's what we can see in for question number 2 with yourself, and that's what we can see for question number 4. Remember what you've learned from practicing questions and doing mock exams previously, and plan your use of time. Don't panic. Number 5, don't panic. Everyone around you seems to start writing furiously straight away, and don't be tempted to follow their example. What's going on here? Well, the context of the question seems to suggest a hypothetical action that might happen in the future. In this case, a particular hypothetical. In this case, if, I've given you the answer, if everyone else starts to work away and then you don't know what to do and you start to panic. So we need to think of the correct hypothetical word that we can use to introduce a hypothetical. And in this case, we've got two possible answers. We can say if. Not a problem. Don't panic if everyone around you seems to start writing furiously. But we're also talking about, or rather the context of this article seems to be suggesting the future, but certainty, something that will happen in the future. And if that's the case, in that particular context, we can also say when. Now, we've got to be careful because if and when are not true synonyms. We can't just swap if and when. If is what I would call a pure hypothetical, so it suggests that it might happen or it might not happen. Whereas when suggests rather that something is going to happen. There's a lot more certainty with when. So when that context is presented, and it's presented in this article, then we can use when. But if that context is not presented, and two options might be possible, if something happens or if something doesn't happen, then we can't use when, we would have to use if. Another hypothetical word that we could use is whether, and that's also something that you should think about because whether we normally use with or, so in order to present two options, so whether something happens or something else happens. So we've got to remember whether. Here whether doesn't work because we're not presented with two different options. So our answers in this case are if and when. Finally, after the exam, don't join in a discussion about everyone else did. Now, you're probably thinking there are two answers here. You're probably thinking what everyone else did, and you're probably thinking how everyone else did. But if you check the answers, you'll see that how is not a correct answer, and you might be scratching your head, and indeed I was, trying to think of a reason why it's not how. And the answer that I came up with, and please let me know if you agree with me or if you disagree with me, please leave a note in the chat or in the comments below once this video is on YouTube. What everyone else did, we need to find a word that talks about results, certain results, or things that happened. Not things that might happen, but things that happened. And the things that happened was that people wrote their answers down on a piece of paper and they know what their answers were. So this was a completed action. If we want to talk about the result, in other words, the exam has been marked and we know what the results of that exam is, well, then we could ask how. How did you do? Did you do well? Did you do badly? Well, that needs to ask how, you need to know the results of the exam. And of course, at this stage, given the context that we've got, at this stage, we don't know what the results are. So we can't say how. At least this is what's going through my mind. As I said, if you disagree with me, please let me know. So here the answer is what, because it refers to an action which is completed, which is certain, and which people can talk about. Not necessarily how. I mean, you might say to me, okay, we could say how to talk about people's feelings, and I could say, okay, fair enough. How did you do? I think I did okay. Maybe you could say that, but I'm not, given this particular context, I'm not 100% persuaded by that argument. But in any case, that's why I think the answer is what and not how. And for number 7, we also have to bear in mind the whole context of the sentence beforehand, or the subclause beforehand. Finally, after the exam, don't join in the discussion about what everyone else did, in other words, what answers they wrote down. You want to frighten yourself. So what this is trying to say is, don't talk to people except if you want to frighten yourself. But of course, we can't say, so it's trying to present a kind of negative contrast. But of course, we can't say except if, because except if are two words and we've only got one word. So what word means except if? The answer is, of course, unless. Now I can't move the thing up anymore, so what I'll do is I'll just move that across. Perhaps you can see it better, and I'll move this over towards the side. There we go, you can see it now behind me. Except if, unless you want to frighten yourself and drain your self-confidence for the next exam. And for number 8, above something, comma. Now the comma is important. Above something, comma, remember that exams are not designed to catch you out, but to find out what you know, etc., etc., etc. Why is the comma important? Well, because the comma closes this expression, or this comma closes the set of words before the comma. Now, what we've got here, these two words, are what we call a linker. So it links. You might know linkers as discourse markers. Very often in course books, they're called discourse markers or they're called linkers. And what discourse markers do, or what linkers do, or you might know them even as transitions. What they do is that they link the sentence before with, or the sentences before with the sentence that follows. And that's exactly what this expression, which is a linker, is trying to do. And this expression is above all, which means the same as whatever you do, or whatever you think, or whatever you do, depending on the context. So whatever you do, remember that, or whatever you think, remember that exams are not designed to catch you out, etc., etc., etc. Or it might be the most important thing. Could also contextually mean the same as above all. Okay, I hope that my explanations for the FCE question didn't confuse you too much. Cup of tea, and that you managed to follow where I was going and my explanations. If I did lose you along the way, then please write to me, let me know, and I'll be happy to explain in more detail, to give you some references maybe, just to help you understand and to point you in the right direction.